All right, you just heard Christine Quinn talk about the difference between how de Blasio and Giuliani handled the homeless populations, and she, for one, criticized Giuliani's move 'em along approach. I want to bring in our panel to talk about that and more. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College, also professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, who's also filed a series recently on this very issue. Scott Vanderhoff's an attorney and a former 5-term Rockland County executive. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And let's first do with the two different approaches. And I think the two former mayors pretty clear on this. When you were there, you saw Rudy's approach. He said it again in a recent piece, move them along. He also said, they're all God's children, but at the same point, he said, make life as uncomfortable for them as possible so they won't stay on the streets if they don't get help. And if they got to move them out of the city, that's a good thing. De Blasio first said there wasn't a problem. Then he said the media was, making this a mountain out of molehill. Then he acknowledged it was a crisis. And he's trying to do things, I guess, in a more traditionally progressive way. How about the two different approaches?
Giuliani, it depends on who you're talking to. Giuliani's approach, to some degree, was effective if you define dealing with the homeless problem as out of sight, out of mind. You're not going to see them on the subways. It is a major problem, a quality of life problem for de Blasio, because it just seems like there's a homeless explosion now where you see them everywhere on the subway, meaning homeless people. The K2 effect, the synthetic marijuana. I just want to say this, Richard, quickly about Speaker Quinn. She was one of the first speakers to have a renewed commitment to women and children, and she put her money where her mouth was in terms of budget dollars to help women in all types of situations. There are only two stories that I have to disassociate myself from. I cannot, on a human level, cover the funeral of a child. I cannot cope personally looking at the small coffins. And it was very hard working on this homeless series because I'm talking to a woman, it looks like you, Professor, or any other woman, and she's telling me a story of how bad luck happened to hit upon her. And in the next room is her 8-year-old daughter. And it's a vicious cycle. And all I could think of was the daughter, and I had to remove myself because she's telling me that at 2 o'clock in the morning, as you just said, she's at the center in the Bronx, and they're just busing her to a hotel where she's got to check out at 6:30 in the morning. Now, how is your child supposed to go to school in that situation? 8 years old. It's repeating the cycle all over again.
And I put a mayor in between, which was Bloomberg, and a lot of people say that the change in the funding structure made it harder to find more quasi-permanent places to put these folks because it made it harder. But it also lended to a different debate. And that is one that we've had here before, which was if you make programs or landing spots for this population, Andrew, more appealing. In fact, Bill O'Reilly, our friend, said you're only going to encourage more folks to go in there. If you make the safety net too cushy, I guess was the analogy, you're going to try and create a bigger population or disincentivize them to leave that hammock. What do you think?
I think we have this debate about a lot of different safety net issues, whether it's welfare or in this case, homelessness. And I think Dominic hit on the key of this issue, which is, what's your goal for success here? Is it not seeing them? Because if that's the case, then the Giuliani approach of just forcing everybody via the police into shelters or out of the city is the right answer, because that's the easiest way to not see them anymore. But that doesn't, to my mind, actually address the issue. And it doesn't help the people who are the victims of this to figure out a way to change their lives and give them access to the tools where they just won't be homeless. It's just that we won't see it anymore. And I think it's somewhat disingenuous. I mean, I think it's really sweeping it under the rug or out of sight, out of mind. And I don't think that helps anybody in the long run.
And also, I would think, Scott, that it's really hard to throw a blanket over this like it's one big problem. I mean, you were a county executive, but you had everything from suburban, obviously, areas, in a bedroom community in New York City. You had some cities within your county, and also you had more rural areas. But you have the mentally ill that are a part of this population. You have the women and children that are part of this. You have people that have substance abuse you have people that are veterans that are making up a good size and bigger than national average in terms of it. What's the hidden part of the story that people who don't have to deal with it don't really realize?
Well, you're right. I mean, homelessness is everywhere, including the suburbs. So you have to have the heart of Christine Quinn and the policies of Rudy Giuliani to make it work. Because you are immediately sympathetic to somebody who doesn't have a place to go. But the public sidewalks are not a bedroom. And so you deal with the issue of where is the housing. Okay, and I've talked about this. So one of the things de Blasio finally came around on is actually providing more money for legal aid, for example, more money for lawyers to help those who might be evicted and become homeless.
And people didn't understand that, but they just saw the headline, he's paying for more attorneys. Those attorneys were basically acting as advocates to try and get these people to get through the bureaucracy to have a roof over their
That's
head,
correct.
right?
What they often did was would fight landlords or fight situations to provide some help to those who are about to be evicted, or it's on some cases unnecessarily roughed up by landlords for one reason or another. And of course, this is where this fine policy difference is. You can't just do it all by heart. These folks need some place to go, and they can't use the sidewalks. And so it does matter that they're not on the sidewalks. It matters as a matter of the lifestyle that New Yorkers want, and also the whole idea of trying to be, I think, sympathetic and comforting to those who need housing. But you need to deal with housing. And the one thing she said I thought was particularly good. This is a multi-pronged problem, which requires all sorts of different kinds of answers. One on the mentally ill, one on the housing issue, one on the use of drugs, and each of these issues is different. But you can't just let them sleep on the streets.
And it comes back again for this mayor, fairly or not, to politically how he handled it and how he's handling it now. It seems like he's got his sea legs on the issue, but for the beginning, he was caught off guard in the beginning. I think his position came off as tone deaf to many who saw a different reality than the one that he was seeing, even if the data was the same. But he does finally seem to be getting his act together on this. Fair?
I think he does, and I think this is a problem that Mayor de Blasio has had all along. You know, he is the leading progressive mayor in the country, if not the world. And what I think he needs to do is to show that progressives can govern a city safely and effectively. And so what are the policies you put in place to do that? That's what he's got to show. And so to deny that there's a homeless problem, I think was hugely problematic, and every thinking person who walked down the street knew that was a problem. And yet I do agree he's gotten better about admitting there's a problem. I'm not so sure we're seeing the policies in terms of how you deal with this, because let's not forget, one of the big questions is, can a progressive Democrat safely and effectively govern a city? He's supposed to show us that that can happen. Well, what are the policies you put in place to do that? And I don't know that anybody around this table can say, here are the 2, 3, 4, 5 things that you need to do. There's no answers there. And so,
and what's funny is nobody thinks that the problem was created under his administration,
No,
but denying
not.
its existence in the beginning all of a sudden made it his issue instead of saying, look what I got handed by my predecessor.
But he said, I'm going to be the progressive mayor and I'm going to handle these problems. And then you need to show how policy-wise you do that, not just for New York, but for the rest of the country.
Well, in fact, he's in Washington now at another progressive national conference. So when we come back, the Republican Party has declared war on Planned Parenthood. In fact, it was issued front and center in our nation's capital today. We'll take you inside the Capitol Hill hearings this afternoon and show you why this fight may be one that the grand old party cannot win.